I want you to think about Federalist 9 and Federalist 47 through 51, where Hamilton and Madison lay out what they understand to be the systemic elements of this new republic. To what extent do you think they were trying to come up with governmental structures that could take the place of civic virtue? Or does civic virtue continue to have an important role to play in the American Republic?
Well, James Madison argued that human nature, it's self-interested. So we need to have vice counter vice and not vice countered with virtue. And he also stated in Federalist 51 that ambition must counteract ambition. So they created the system of checks and balances and separation of powers, so then this vice can counter vice.
Hamilton sort of brings up an issue in one of the Federalist Papers, and he says that we need just a one single, basically, executive power in charge, or what's one president, because if we don't have just this one president in charge, then it's going to cover up the flaws of what that one president is doing, because the person just put the blame on the other person, etc. So this takes us back then to talk about the councils of Rome, who were basically the military leaders of Rome. What happened is there were two people in charge, so when we could look to see basically what the problems in Rome were, ultimately based on Hamilton's argument, which I actually believe was in Fed 70 or Federalist Paper 70, you wouldn't know. Looking back on Roman history, we can see that just having one executive is the most preferable way.
Yeah, he does lay out the new science of politics in Federalist 9, and it's a very complicated matter. But where I'm trying to get you to think with me or help me understand from your presentation is you said it was the narcissism of a few that led to the fall of Rome. So has the new science of politics prevented that possibility occurring in the United States?
Well, in Federalist 10, Madison argues that we need to expand the sphere so that there aren't those few factions that can take the power. When you say that the narcissism of a few men, we can also see that it can be the narcissism of a few political factions.
But that's what I'm trying to understand is that just not a problem for us? I mean, I just heard pretty snarky things said about President Obama and former Governor Sarah Palin. Do we just need to stop worrying about them because the system will take care of them?
No, I think that we need to look to David Mayhew's argument. He believes that since congressmen and senators are single-minded seekers of re-election, we cannot trust them, because we can see that in years where the Congress and the president are in the same party, important legislation is passed because the president is the only person trying to push this legislation. When they're in different parties, it's difficult because congressmen don't want to push their own legislation, and they're willing to just let the president take the blame for the inaction.
This is also supported by Rome. We can see that Polybius explained that people basically, this goes back to the whole corruption basically, that he explained that people who were in charge, everyone in the Senate, etc., they basically wanted to keep running for office again because they wanted this high social standing, they wanted this power, they wanted this basically luxury that came with being in charge. So we can sort of see this, we can sort of see what's happening in Rome sort of being mirrored now in the American government, where people just keep running for election.
This raises a lot of really interesting issues. I want to take us back to a more fundamental question. The founders, as you pointed out, were really concerned with that the republic might fall into chaos, and they were very much afraid of an evolving and emerging tyranny. Of which were they most afraid, do you think?
I think they were more afraid of chaos because, as you could see, when they were adopting the new Constitution, they recently they switched from the Articles of Confederation, which the Shays Rebellion, and Henry Knox, former Secretary of War, stated that we must clip the mad wings of democracy so that a minority rule or a majority rule would not become too corrupt and then lead to chaos.
I think the answer is definitely chaos, because we can see in Federalist 55 that Madison writes, even if every Athenian were Socrates, every assembly would, every assembly would still be a mob. So we can see that they are afraid of democracy because they are afraid that we cannot separate the passion from reason. That's why we see the Electoral College arising, and we see that until the 17th Amendment, senators were not directly elected by the people.
Go ahead, sorry.
In fact, when you compare the Roman Republic to America, we can see that in Rome's government, except for the dictatorship, every magistrate position, there were two major people running the government, thus they could veto each other. Except in the American government, as stated in Federalist 70, that there are not two people running the executive office. There's only one person, which leaves open this idea that they would believe that tyranny is preferable versus having chaos.
I'm going to disagree with my colleagues here, because this type of chaos that they're talking about, is actually simply just tyranny of the majority. In the time of the founders, democracy was a dirty word, and they associated it with this tyranny of the majority, or mobocracy, as we've seen in, for example, how they stated Shays Rebellion, or in Rogue Island, for example.
I think ultimately what it comes down to is, I guess to put it in a way that Mr. Gordon would put it, the answer to your question is just yes. The founders were definitely afraid of this tyranny of majority, tyrannical leaders, but they're also afraid of the chaos. And the reason that they were afraid of the chaos, or the reason that they were afraid of the tyranny of the majority, is because they felt that this tyranny of the majority would then lead into this chaos. Because you can't separate, as Hume would explain, the passion from reason. So I think essentially they were afraid of both, but for sort of different reasons.
But when Madison refers to this notion of legitimacy is essentially derived from the great body of society, how would he have felt in 2010 with public opinion polls being taken by the hour? Was this I guess my question is, in a sense, is this the equivalent of direct democracy?
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. My question is, in today's world where polling is done instantaneously, it's very difficult for legislatures and even the executive branch to conduct its office if they pay attention to these polls. Is this something that Madison would have supported, this notion of direct democracy with information coming instantaneously, or was he viewing direct democracy in a different way?
Well, I think polls, were good to the founders. You can see in the Massachusetts original Constitution, Part the First, Section 8, says that we must have periodic elections in order to prevent corruption. And I think now what kind of helps to aid the purpose of periodic elections is these polls, because our representatives can see what our opinions are and what we are fed up with and what we appreciate.